At 2 a.m. on January 3, 2026, Caracas jolted awake. Distant thuds rolled across the hills like targeted thunder. The sky flashed. Smoke rose near military installations. Whole sections of the capital went dark as power and communications collapsed. In that blackout, confusion became a weapon. People stepped onto balconies, phones up, trying to understand. War? Coup? Or something stranger? Then the impossible rumor spread. The president was being hunted inside his own capital. This wasn't improvised. Months of planning. Pentagon, CIA, Special Forces, over 150 aircraft staged. The night narrows to one address, a fortified safe house. Outside, chaos and darkness. Inside, seconds and doors, boots on tile, radios hissing, sparks as steel gets cut. The team had rehearsed on a full replica. They push in fast. Reports say he tried to reach a safe room but couldn't close the door in time. He and his wife surrender. From there, it's a race, airborne, over water, out, before the country regroups. Within hours, he's in U.S. custody, bound for New York to face drug trafficking and narco-terrorism charges. Caracas called it kidnapping. Washington called it arrest. Then came the line that made headlines, a warning. The U.S. would run Venezuela for now. So how did we get here, where one sovereign state removes another's leader in 2026? To understand that, you need Venezuela's story, because this pattern started long before Maduro. Venezuela's early politics weren't built on strong courts or stable rules. They were built on men who could take power and hold it. For decades after independence, the country cycled through caudillos, regional strongmen who commanded loyalty through force, charisma, and the promise of order. Civil wars erupted, governments collapsed. The pattern was clear. Venezuela didn't trust institutions, it trusted whoever could win. And then, Venezuela discovers the one thing that turns power into a jackpot: oil. When oil arrives in the early 1900s, the state learns a dangerous habit. Money can replace consent. Juan Vicente Gomez seizes control and holds it for 27 years, building roads, paying soldiers, crushing dissent. He doesn't ask for legitimacy, he buys it. Order comes first, then he sells it as stability. The country modernizes, but only on his terms. Freedom isn't part of the deal. But oil doesn't just fund the state, it trains it. It teaches leaders that wealth flowing from the ground means you don't need to negotiate with your people. You just need to control the pipeline. By the 1950s, under Marcos Pérez Jiménez, Venezuela looks modern. Highways cutting through mountains, skyscrapers rising in Caracas, infrastructure projects that could rival any developed nation. But beneath the surface, the cost is fear. Prisons fill, critics vanish, silence becomes survival. Progress, it turns out, can be built on a foundation of repression. Then the country tries something radical, sharing power instead of seizing it. After 1958, democracy becomes a pact. Two major parties, one center-left, one center-right, agree the system comes first. They'll alternate power, distribute oil revenue, keep the military out of politics. It's called punto fijo, and for a while it works. Venezuela becomes one of Latin America's most stable democracies. But oil money starts acting like a drug, easy to spend, hard to manage, impossible to quit. Corruption spreads, inequality deepens. When global prices crash in the 80s and 90s, the pact begins to rot from the inside. And when the good years end, somebody shows up with a promise people can't ignore. Hugo Chavez doesn't end the cycle, he upgrades it. He takes the old caudillo template, charisma, control, contempt for opposition, and wraps it in revolutionary language. Politics becomes identity, loyalty becomes survival, the state becomes a personal mission. He nationalizes industries, rewrites the constitution, builds a movement that doesn't just govern Venezuela, it absorbs it. Oil money flows directly into social programs, binding millions of people to his vision. Chavez doesn't just lead, he becomes the system. And when Chavez dies in 2013, the machine doesn't disappear, it gets inherited. Maduro doesn't enter as a legend, he enters as a survivor, trained inside Chavez's system, shaped by loyalty, not charisma. He's a former bus driver turned union organizer turned foreign minister. He knows how the machine works because he helped build it. But he's never been the star. He's been the operator, the enforcer, the one who stays in the room after everyone else leaves. And then Chavez is gone, and suddenly the job isn't to lead, it's to keep the machine from collapsing. He inherits a country already split into two realities. One side sees a revolution under threat. The other sees a takeover cementing itself. The economy is shaky, oil prices are falling, protests are spreading, and the margin for error is razor thin. Maduro doesn't have Chavez's magnetism. He doesn't have the revolutionary credibility. What he has is control over the apparatus and the willingness to use it. So Maduro makes a choice, one that defines everything that follows. He doesn't try to unite Venezuela, he fortifies his side of it. Step by step, the system stops being a debate and becomes a lock. The Supreme Court aligns with the executive. The National Assembly gets stripped of power when the opposition wins it. Security forces are rewarded for loyalty, not for neutrality. Elections still happen, but the rules bend just enough to ensure one outcome. Rivals get arrested, exiled, or barred from running. The state learns to protect itself, not through popularity, but through control. But power isn't only held by speeches, it's held by money and by networks. The U.S. doesn't frame Maduro as a normal authoritarian. It frames him as something worse, a leader tied to trafficking, money laundering, and what Washington calls narco-terrorism. In 2020, the Department of Justice indicts Maduro and key members of his inner circle, alleging they turned Venezuela into a hub for cocaine shipments and criminal enterprise. The claim isn't just that Maduro is corrupt, it's that politics and crime have fused, that the state itself has become a narco network. Whether you accept that framing or not, it's the legal foundation the U.S. later uses to justify what comes next. Now add the collapse and you get the real trap. Services fail, hospitals run out of medicine, hyperinflation destroys savings overnight, power grids fail, water stops running. More than 7 million people leave the country, one of the largest displacement crises in the world. Money loses meaning, the bolivar becomes worthless. People survive by trading in dollars, by remittances, by leaving. And still, the state holds, because when survival is the currency, fear becomes the strongest policy. The military stays loyal because they control the economy. The elite stays loyal because they have nowhere else to go. The population fractures, some too exhausted to resist, others too dependent on state handouts to risk change. Maduro doesn't need to be loved, he just needs to outlast the opposition. Which brings us to the next question. How did the U.S. and Venezuela go from oil-linked partners to open enemies? For years, the relationship had a simple gravity. Oil, markets, proximity, influence. Venezuela supplied crude. The U.S. bought it. Diplomacy followed commerce. It wasn't love, it was interest. Stable, predictable, transactional. Even during periods of tension, the underlying logic held. Both sides needed each other more than they needed a fight. Then Chavez turns the relationship into a fight on purpose. Chavez doesn't treat the U.S. as a trading partner. He treats it as the villain in his story, and that story becomes national identity. He calls out American imperialism at the UN. He allies with Cuba, Iran, Russia. He nationalizes oil assets tied to U.S. companies. He frames every domestic struggle as resistance against Washington's interference. It's not just rhetoric, it's strategy. By making the U.S. the external enemy, he unifies his base and justifies tighter control at home. The relationship stops being about pragmatism and becomes about principle. After Chavez, the distrust doesn't fade, it hardens. Under Maduro, the accusations intensify. The U.S. blames Venezuela for regional instability, drug trafficking, and humanitarian disaster. Venezuela blames the U.S. for economic sabotage and regime change plotting. Both sides might be right. Pressure builds, sanctions, isolation, asset freezes, and a belief in Washington that the regime will crack under weight. First come targeted sanctions on individuals, then sectoral sanctions on oil, then a full economic embargo. The goal is clear: make governing impossible, force collapse, wait for change. Then comes the moment the U.S. crosses a line that can't be uncrossed. In 2019, after a disputed election and mass protests, the U.S. stops treating Maduro as the rightful leader. It recognizes opposition leader Juan Guaido as interim president instead. Dozens of countries follow. Venezuelan embassies get reassigned. Bank accounts get redirected. From that point forward, the relationship isn't diplomacy. It's a contest over who gets to call themselves the state. Maduro holds the territory, the military, the institutions. Guaido holds the international recognition, the frozen assets, the legitimacy claim. The U.S. bets on pressure. Maduro bets on endurance. But even that doesn't explain 2026. The missing ingredient is timing. By late 2025, the calculus shifts. Another disputed election sparks fresh protests. Migration surges again, destabilizing neighboring countries. Intelligence reports suggest Maduro's inner circle is more fractured than it appears, and there's a narrowing window, militarily, politically, diplomatically, before the situation either stabilizes or metastasizes into something worse. Washington begins to believe that containment has failed, that waiting has become its own risk. So the trigger stack builds. Disputed elections, deeper instability, narco-terrorism indictments already on the books, a belief that the window is closing, and, crucially, a U.S. administration willing to act unilaterally. This isn't one decision, it's a cascade. Pressure shifts into planning. Contingency becomes operation. The question stops being should we and becomes when. So what did the plan look like when it turned from paperwork into boots and blasts?
Operations like this don't start with explosions. They start with maps, informants, rehearsals, and one goal: find the person before the city can hide him. For months, U.S. intelligence had been tightening the net. Naval blockades offshore, carrier strike groups positioned in the Caribbean, and CIA assets embedded deep inside Maduro's inner circle. Delta Force built an exact replica of his safe house and rehearsed the raid until they could execute it blindfolded. They knew the layout, the security patterns, the exact moment he'd be vulnerable. Over 150 aircraft were staged. Amphibious ready groups floated in international waters. The world watched the carriers. The real operation was happening in the shadows. Then the night begins, and the first move isn't aimed at Maduro, it's aimed at the city. At exactly 2 a.m. Venezuelan time, F-35 stealth fighters punch through the sky, targeting air defense installations, Russian S-300 systems, radar networks, command centers. Fort Tuna and La Calota Air Base light up under precision strikes. The goal isn't destruction, it's disruption. Communications black out, power grids fail. Ground forces scramble to figure out what's happening, where it's happening, whether this is invasion or something surgical. Strikes and raids create the same effect: panic, fog, broken communication. In that fog, the fastest side wins. While Venezuelan forces react to explosions on the perimeter, helicopters skim low over rooftops, flying below radar, invisible in the chaos. And in the middle of that fog, the key moment happens. Delta Force descends on a secure compound inside the Fort Tuna complex, the safe house. Attack helicopters lay suppressive fire. Operators breach multiple entry points simultaneously. Flash grenades disorient guards. Blowtorches cut through reinforced doors before they can be locked. The Presidential Guard responds, but it's already too late. The team moves with surgical speed, room to room, coordinated, relentless. Somewhere in Caracas, a door gets opened, a circle closes, and the target is in custody. Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, are physically secured. No negotiation, no standoff, just restraint and immediate movement to the extraction point. From that second on, the mission becomes a race. Extraction before the country can respond. Specialized helicopters capable of urban extraction and mid-air refueling lift off within minutes, leaving Venezuelan airspace and heading toward a secure floating base in the Caribbean. Because the capture is only half the battle, the other half is what Venezuela does next. A removed president doesn't automatically remove the system. Power scrambles, ministries, military commanders, regional governors, all waiting to see who leads, who resists, who falls in line. Does the vice president assume control? Does the military retaliate? Do the streets erupt? The machinery of the state doesn't shut down just because its leader is gone. If anything, it becomes more dangerous. Loyalists prepare responses, opposition groups mobilize, and everyone waits to see if this moment becomes collapse, transition, or something worse. And while Venezuela scrambles, the world takes notes. In hours, it becomes a global story: sovereignty, international law, precedent. Allies stay silent, rivals condemn immediately, the UN Security Council convenes, regional blocs fracture. This isn't just about Venezuela anymore, it's about what happens when one country decides the rules don't apply. Because the raid is the loud part, the consequences are the part that can reshape the next decade.
If a superpower can remove a sitting president and call it law enforcement, every rival power studies the method, and every small country feels exposed. The raid isn't just about Venezuela, it's about what becomes thinkable. It rewrites the playbook on intervention, sovereignty, and the gap between what international law says and what powerful states actually do. The precedent isn't technical, it's psychological. It tells the world that if the justification is strong enough and the execution is fast enough, you can act first and deal with the fallout later. Now look at Russia, not for outrage, for calculation. Moscow's response will be loud: condemnation, UN resolutions, speeches about American imperialism. But beneath that, there's a colder read. Message: the US will act directly when it decides the stakes are high enough. Fear: this precedent can be used again, potentially closer to home, against allies or proxies. Opportunity: sell the story globally as proof that the West ignores sovereignty when convenient. Russia doesn't just react, it weaponizes the narrative. Every country nervous about US intervention becomes a potential partner. Every regional power questioning the rules becomes an audience. China sees something even sharper, a rehearsal of speed. What it says publicly: sovereignty must be respected, non-interference is sacred, international law applies to everyone. What it learns privately: power moves fast, and justification follows after. If the US can strike a capital, extract a leader, and frame it as justice rather than war, then the gap between unthinkable and done is narrower than it looks. Beijing watches the timeline, How quickly the operation moved, how little warning was given, how few allies were consulted. That's not a condemnation, that's a case study. And that lesson echoes in the most sensitive flashpoint on Earth. Venezuela isn't Taiwan. The geography is different, the alliances are different, the stakes are incomparably higher. But precedents change what leaders believe they can justify. If act first, explain later looks survivable, if the international backlash is manageable, if allies stay quiet, if the operation succeeds, it becomes tempting, not as a blueprint, but as proof of concept. The question isn't whether China copies the raid, it's whether the raid makes other rapid unilateral moves feel more acceptable in a crisis. And the fallout won't stay on paper, it hits real people fast. Oil markets react. Venezuela's production, already crippled, faces new uncertainty. Migration pressure spikes as the country teeters between collapse and transition. Allies split, some quietly relieved Maduro is gone, others horrified by the method. And every region with a strongman starts asking one question: am I next? Authoritarians tighten security, opposition groups gain hope, or lose it, depending on whether they see this as liberation or destabilization. So what happens now? Does Venezuela stabilize, or does this become a long, ugly standoff?
This wasn't a random night, it was a pattern. Strongmen who built power on control instead of consent, oil wealth that funded states instead of citizens, broken trust that turned neighbors into enemies, rising pressure that squeezed until something snapped. Venezuela's cycle ran for over a century: caudillos, coups, democracy, then back to autocracy wrapped in revolution. And on January 3, 2026, that pressure became force. A capital struck, a president extracted, a precedent set. The raid took hours, the fallout could take decades. And now the next chapter splits three ways. The first path is a fragile transition. Temporary leadership steps in, a negotiated deal emerges, elections get scheduled, maybe monitored, maybe real. Stability, but only if the system agrees to loosen its grip. The military would need guarantees, the elite would need amnesty, the opposition would need legitimacy. It's possible, it's happened before in other countries, but it requires everyone involved to believe that compromise is safer than conflict. And in Venezuela, trust is the scarcest resource. If enough people see an opening, if the old guard fractures, if international pressure holds, if civil society organizes, then maybe this becomes a reset, a painful one, but a reset nonetheless. If that fails, the next path is darker. A hard standoff. The institutions stay loyal to the old order. A successor rises from within the regime. Protests surge in the streets, and crackdowns follow. The country becomes a locked room, half demanding change, half enforcing control, and no one strong enough to win cleanly. This scenario isn't about Caracas anymore. It's about what the world learned watching it happen, that the gap between unthinkable and done is thinner than anyone believed. Which scenario do you think wins, and what does this teach the next leader who feels untouchable? Does this become a turning point toward accountability, or does it become a blueprint for unilateral power? Let me know in the comments, and if you want to understand how power really shifts in the 21st century, hit subscribe.
And this is the world we inherited.